Tooltips they're sort of one of those, like, they're plumbing, you know? Like a lot of UI UX stuff, there's stuff that you have to have in your game to make it able to be played, you know? You need to deliver information to players somehow. But like every like low-level part of games, there's so many things that make it way more challenging than, frankly, it has any right to be.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 566 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the weekly podcast for indie game developers. I'm Seth, and I'm the games programmer.
I'm out on the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Tim.
God, I really can't get so many M's in that. I just can't.
You gotta warm up your lips before the podcast.
Yeah, just change your title, you know?
Also that.
I could, but it's kind of fun to just try to mumble through the word miscellaneous.
You just gotta get through it.
It's I'm Adam and I'm the miscellaneous. It's just there's a lot of M's in there.
Adam and I'm the miscellaneous program.
Change your name.
It is actually,
Yeah.
as a name, it is like annoyingly hard to say because the M closes your mouth instantly, you know?
Mhm.
So, because it's the D followed by the M, it's just like, right? And so when I'm trying to tell people my name across like a counter or something, they're always like, what?
No one knows my name.
Like, I can't say it louder because my mouth is closed the whole time I'm saying my name, you know? But,
I think probably everybody has some kind of gripe about their name. For me, it's that mine is only one syllable, which means like oftentimes when people are asking me what my name is, if there's any kind of like noise or whatever, I'm like, Seth, I'm like, Zach?
too fast.
It's such a short name that
Not enough
people
information,
can't really,
you know?
there's not enough information.
Yeah.
People can't infer what the hell I'm saying if they can't hear me very well.
It's,
Or if I'm
it's
wearing
also
a
the
mask,
all of
you
the
know?
all of the phonemes involved are also like because the s kind of sounds like a bunch of different ones, and the th at the other side kind of sounds like a bunch of them, right?
And there are certain regions of the world where the th sound isn't really a thing, or you know, then that there's a whole bunch of problems with it. But anyways, we are Butterscotch Shenanigans. Speaking of
names that are
people
difficult,
can't say, and today is still March 20th, 2020. Quick, we are recording a double episode back to back because we are at PAX.
yeah. And by still, you mean if you just finished listening to the last episode,
Yeah.
it's still that
We're recording the two episodes back to back. We'll be out at PAX, just cruising around. So
we
I
will
assume
have been out at PAX.
I assume it went great, and we'll have
Probably.
something to say about it in the next episode. I imagine the lines TSA will be interesting because apparently that's not going too good.
Yeah.
You know, but everything else is going great. So it's just that one
Just
thing. If we can get past that, there's no problems.
It's probably fine.
Yeah. So today we want to talk a little bit about delivering information to players via tooltips, which
Very specific, super specific topic.
But hey,
Get
this
in
is
there.
the podcast for indie game developers. Okay, if you're an indie game developer, you might have tooltips.
Probably.
And you might have some problems with tooltips. And more importantly, you also have players who don't know what's going on and want to know what's going on, right?
And you're probably gonna have artists who are like, "Why can't we do this with a tooltip?" So I want to paint you a picture. Okay, we'll paint you a picture. We've been doing this for almost 15 years.
15
Okay.
years.
And this whole time, every time you got to tell players stuff related to a particular thing. So that's what a tooltip is. It's like, oh, I have a weapon.
What
Let's
does it
display
do?
the information.
What does it do?
Yeah.
What does it do? How does it work? Yada, yada. Before you even get into the problems, we've talked about localization a lot. I'm not even going to go into that extra wrinkle of that thing.
Just
on
know
this.
that it's also there.
It's also there lurking, trying to kill you in the background. But the first thing you want to do is like, I just want to show players a bunch of information about some particular item. And ideally, I want to do it in a way that has a good visual hierarchy. If you're a person who, does art or graphic design or just gives a shit about what your game looks like, so they can tell, what's important. What's the name of this thing? What's the description? What kind of thing is it? And then if I just kind of glance at it, can I get the gist of, where I might want to focus my attention on this particular item? So for all this time.
And also, maybe this is for later, but then also you need to be able to convey to a player that this information exists and how they can get it.
Yes, also that. Yeah. Do they even know where to get it? So tooltips they're sort of one of those, like, they're plumbing, like a lot of UI UX stuff. There's stuff that you have to have in your game to make it able to be played, You need to deliver information to players somehow. But like every like low level part of games, there's so many things that make it way more challenging than, frankly, it has any right to be, right?
Yeah. And also the volume is high too, right? Because anybody who's localized your game so that you've actually like looked at your full set of text, right? Even a game that has a lot of narrative stuff in it, most of your text is effectively tooltips. It's not dialogue, it's not story, right? And with probably some exceptions for like an incredibly enormous game, but an incredibly enormous game, you know what it has? Lots of other stuff. You know what that stuff needs? Tooltips, right? So tooltips are actually like the main text that are even in your game.
Yeah.
Yes. So for all this time, we've only been able to just put words on the screen. And this has been a gripe of mine for, I think, basically the whole time, which is, we start making a game like Quadrupus Rampage basically 15 years ago, and we're like, hey, can we make it so that certain parts of this, inline text for us are different colors, for example, as the words come out. If it's like, or can you do some fun animation where they like plop in, over time, or they get all wiggly and wobbly like you see in some, narrative games like Undertale or whatever else. Can we do that?
Like you can see it's doable, right? Because you've played games where that's happened, right?
Yeah. What's the big fucking deal? Why can't we do that? Seth, what is the deal? Why are tooltips so hard to make? Why do we care right now? I guess also just as grounding for this whole thing.
Yeah. So before we get into the technical bullshit about colors and fonts and bold and underline and all that stuff, there is just like a higher level question about just delivering information to players in general so that they know what's going on, right?
Yeah.
So tooltips are great because they allow you to create what we would call a pull system as opposed to a push system. I don't know if you guys have ever played a game where you boot it up and the game goes, here's the instructions. And then it just kind of just blasts you in the face with like an encyclopedia of here's all the controls, here's what the enemies do, here's where your health bar, sometimes they'll like put little arrows and they'll just like point at every UI element on the screen all the time. I hate that shit. Right? Everybody hates that. And we hate it because we don't know what information is missing. Like we don't know what we need to know. And so all information seems equally important when it gets thrown at you like that, and it's overwhelming.
You can't remember it, right? And the next best alternative, which is what we try to do, is we do the same thing. Like we put a pop-up up or whatever. Like we show you the information, but when we think you first need it, so that at least it's relevant at the time, right? Which I would like that's a form of a tooltip, right? But that's still not,
it's still
not on demand.
It's a push system, but we're guessing when you're ready to receive the information, right?
Yeah.
And
but if you know you need some information, that doesn't let you go get it, right?
Correct.
Right. Because we've pushed it onto you when we decided, right?
Yeah. And now how do you get it back if you need it again?
Yeah. And this is something that I always think is there's kind of interesting conflicts between like game development and education, right? Which is like, as a game developer, we create a world that has rules and all kinds of things going on in it. And a player coming in does not know any of this. They don't know what the hell we're trying to do or how to do anything or any of that. And so we have to teach them, right? And we have to develop the game in a way that the game allows the player to learn in a way that's super fun, right?
Yeah, and we also reuse like common patterns that lots of video games use as like that's the way you kind of bridge the gap where you avoid having to tell players something. If for example, if your control scheme in a first person shooter is WASD, right? It's like, yeah, you probably don't have to tell players to use WASD, right? Yeah. But there's a limit to how much you can do that because games differ so much from each other and what they
right.
Actually,
and if you kind of contrast that with how people are taught in general, like in school, right? It's only a push system, and it has nothing to do with whether you're interested in the material, whether you're in a position where you understand the relevance of the material that you're being handed, all that stuff. And there's a reason why school is hard and people don't like it.
Yeah.
And it's because that's how it works, right?
But that's also coupled with the idea that also now everyone's experience with any technology, whether it's games or websites or apps, whatever, right, is being bombarded constantly by suddenly appearing pop-up messages telling you something, and almost universally something you don't care about. So people now have a because we like to joke about like, oh, people don't read, whatever. But the reality is it's a two-parter. One is there's some element of that, but actually the bigger problem is that people have now a built-in reflexive close a dialogue
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
like you're
Get this out of my face.
I find myself just doing it. Like all of a sudden I'll be like, holy shit, I should have read whatever that was. What was that?
Yeah, well, I guess it's gone. So
Yeah, but I just found myself closing it on reflex because I'm just so used to being bombarded with stuff that I don't know, or I don't need or don't care about.
Yeah. So all that is to say, then, this is enter the tooltip, the magical solution to all our problems. The tooltip where when a player's like, "What's this?" that they can click on it or hover over it or whatever, and
they know that they can do that because it's the other part of the problem too, right? Because if they don't know they can do that, then you might as well not have a tooltip.
Right. And one of our goals with How Many Dudes is just try to make everything clickable. Like if there's anything on screen where somebody's like, "What is that?" that they can click on it, they can hover over it or whatever, and bam, something pops up that gives them more information about it, right? So build the entire UI into a pull system where people, whenever they're curious about something, whenever they're ready to receive the information, they can just get it. They can get it, just that little bit of information in that moment, right? So all that is to say then that tooltips are super, super useful and super important for delivering that information because it allows you to do that. But making good tooltips is complicated. And this is where we are currently at our How Many Dudes dev. So for the demo, we have 184 things in the game between dudes and relics. Relics are little items that you can get that empower your dudes in some way. Every dude has a special ability of some kind, and every relic does something that augments something about your dudes or that specific dude or whatever. So the first thing we have to consider with the tooltips is how concise they are and consistency of the text, right? So one of the things that we had to do with the demo was basically go through before we released it and revise every single tooltip for consistency. So look for, if we use a certain word that's like a keyword in it, is that word used in the same way every time we use it? And is that word always used when it applies? So I think we had like an example of buffs meaning like temporary effects that get applied during combat. So if some buffs stack and other ones don't, so like let's say you have a buff that's like it gives you 10% damage and it stacks 3 times, right? Like, okay, that means like if this buff happens 3 times, I have 30% damage, right? Pretty understandable, right? And if you have another buff that also stacks, but the tooltip doesn't say that it does, then
it's confusing. Yeah.
You can't figure it out, right? The player's like, does it, right? Does it not, or whatever. So the first step is just kind of like clarity of language and going through and making sure that the words that you're saying mean what they're supposed to mean.
And that's just kind of like, I don't know, that's just kind of like content stuff, right? That's like,
but it's
also, but that precision is really important.
Well, it's the first layer that supports the rest of it.
The rest of it,
right?
Yeah. And so,
this is also why we just to like about that precision. This is also why we really so you have to be fully consistent about how you use the words, because words never just mean one thing anyway. But in the context of video game, like when you say the word damage, right? That could either mean a bunch of different kinds of things in that video game, all related to the idea of damage, or you could be meaning something extremely specific, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to decide what you mean and then make sure that you're successfully communicating to the player. And one of the ways that like we do that is just those terms that we mean in a very specific way, capitalized, right? Just a little subtle thing, because now people see that it's like weird that it's capitalized, but it like signals that, hey, this is
it's a concept.
Special.
This is a concept that is specific, not just the idea of damage.
Yeah. But why do we capitalize it? We capitalize it because when all we have is text, without bold, without color, without any other flair, then all we can really do is capitalize things, right?
You can you can kind of gesture at it, but you can't really pull attention in a big way to be like, this is a thing,
Right. And
you just
so
kind of hope that people get it,
Yeah. And so kind of the holy grail of the tooltip is it uses very clear, concise, consistent language. And whenever there are special terms that mean something more specific in your game, that those terms are essentially like links, right? Like they're kind of like they're highlighted in a different color.
Highlighted,
They look different, and then the
They basically
player
take you to a glossary for that term, right?
right. And if the player's like, "What is that?" that they can click there and get even more information about what that means, right?
Now, if you're recognizing, as I feel like, as I did, that like tooltips are universal games, just like UIs are universal games. We have all these game engines, right? That cost money to use. They're supposed to take care of all sorts of problems. One would think, that you could just be like, I'll write some text and I'll just tell while I'm writing the text out, hey, this dude does 15 damage when blah. That I could just somehow, when I'm writing that string, say, take that damage word and
Make it
make it
bold.
this color. Make it
Make it
bold.
red,
Especially if you're
Yeah.
used to like working with HTML or in
Right.
CSS.
Which
Right.
everybody
because
is. So,
because HTML is a script. It's not a programming language, but it's a
It's a markup language.
Markup language.
markup. Yeah.
It describes how things looks and like what they mean semantically, right? That's what
Yeah.
its purpose.
And like, because one of the biggest earliest problems of making web pages when the internet was first
Mhm.
becoming a thing was like, I've got this like sentence, and I want to have people be able to click on this word in the sentence and go to a different page in my site, right?
Or hover over it to see what it is. And now these days, it's also so that when a search engine parses it, it can identify like the different components, and also so that when somebody's reading with a screen reader, if they're have lower eyesight, then that the screen reader as a little robot, right, can successfully identify the meaningful elements of the page, of being like, oh, this is a heading, this is a paragraph.
So I
this
guess
is
what
whatever.
I'm saying is like you think that this would be easy and possible and a high priority because it's in every game, and also this is very much solved technology on the like browser side, right? Which is the thing everybody interacts with all the time. And you'd be completely fucking wrong.
Yeah,
That's
game
the crazy
engines
part.
have
Crazy
universally decided that text is not their problem.
Well,
right?
more important,
Yeah.
game engines have basically decided that UIs don't matter. You know,
Yes,
like they
But
just
UIs in
don't-
general and text in particular. Yeah,
they-
also crazy. Yeah.
They generally don't provide the tools necessary to make UI development easy. They focus very heavily on the optimization side of like collisions and physics and graphics rendering and that kind of stuff, which those are also very hard problems, right?
Mhm.
But when it comes to UI stuff, they tend to be lackluster. I think Godot has this ability to do text rendering like that.
I know that Godot has the best support for like font related technology of all the engines.
but also
that are out
it's
there. I
open
don't know what it
source.
means to use them in game because we don't ever use Godot, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and so and even there are certain things about this that you don't think about as an end user, but when you're actually on the development side of it, you're like, oh, this is a huge problem. So even just stuff like if you want stuff to be in bold, you know,
Mhm.
if you ever opened up a font file, you can look at all the different characters in a font. You might notice something. None of them are bold,
Mhm.
right? Unless you open up a different font file, which is an alternate version of that font. That's the bold version of the font.
It's
or
actually two
more
different
recently,
fonts.
if
It's
you
two
open a
fonts.
variable font, which is a different kind of technology, right? But the idea is that it basically has encoded instructions for how to make things bold.
How to
in
make
it.
things bold.
Right.
Yeah.
But when you open it, so that's a setting, right? So now if you open it in a particular setting, then everything is a particular level of boldness, right? Because the font, the boldness is either a variable in a setting in a variable font, which again is a different kind of technology, or it
A
is
separate font.
just
entirely.
the state that a font is in or is not in.
Mhm.
So what that means kind of in practice is like, let's say, so I'm in my game and I'm like, okay, I'm going to write this thing deals 300 damage and I want 300 to be white and I want damage to be red. Okay.
Mhm. Cool.
And also I want damage to be bold.
Ooh.
So what that means then is you have to find a way to, as you render out each character, at some point you need to tell the game engine, okay, I've written the first part of this sentence. Now stop here. And now change the text color to white. And now we're going to write a new piece of text, which is the string 100, right? And now we still have to keep track of where we are because we still got one more word to draw afterward. But now we also have to change the font because it's bold now.
But even
so we
the
gotta
change the font
font.
part isn't that simple because it's not just make it bold now because it's again bold doesn't exist. It's not a real thing, right? So what it actually do is switch to a different font, right?
Yes.
How do you know which font to switch to?
You got to tell it somehow.
You got to tell it. So
you
have to know.
So you have to somehow behind the scenes
you have to know
hook up,
which specific font the bold font is for this particular kind of text and tell it that somehow.
Right. And so, and also if you think about like, and again, it's so interesting how you experience things as a user as one thing when behind the scenes it's just not really what it is at all, right? So if you think about when you're in a word processor and you're looking at the words, right? What actually has to happen is the word processor has to know every single character that it's rendering is essentially like a little piece from the font file, right? That it's like taking
a collage of pictures.
Yeah. So it's
we call it a glyph, right? It's a glyph is a single like renderable thing.
So and it's a kind of incredible technology if you think about it, right?
It's very cool technology.
But what it's actually doing is it's drawing thousands of pictures.
Yep.
Thousands of pictures, just one after another.
And a font file is just an instruction set that says for the character represented by this number, because ultimately it's all just binary numbers, right? So like for this number that represents the English letter A, here's where you find the glyph or set of possible glyphs in the font file and the rules around how you render it, which is gives you like your kerning, because it's not just grab the thing out of there and draw it, which is like that's how game developers think about sprites. Yeah, because it's also like, okay, well, it's an A followed by an F, and that has a different kerning than an A followed by an S, right? Or I'm doing ligatures. Now, if I put two Fs together, I have to replace them both with a fancy F or whatever, right? So font files describe all of this, and then a rendering engine that renders text knows how to convert like a stream of your text characters, right, into mapping those onto the rule sets and figuring out where to draw everything, which is again, it's not as simple as just like now it's an A, draw an A. It's what else is going on right now, right in the text.
So if you're a game developer, you got your engine, and you're like, I want some fancy text in here. I want some bolds. I want some colors. I want things to pop. Guess what?
If the engine doesn't do all that for you, and it doesn't, then you gotta do it.
You gotta figure out.
There's a reason that shit's hard, right? Because it's incredibly complicated.
Yeah. Now, in a lot of cases, there will be packages that people have made to solve these problems. So probably
there's a really good one for GameMaker.
Yeah, there's one for GameMaker called Scribble, which I think is by Juju Adams.
Yeah, I think so.
I think. And it's a massive, massive project.
Huge.
Because the goal of that project is to try to solve
every text problem.
All text problem you could possibly have.
So you can animate text as it comes in. You can wiggle it. You could you do all sorts of weird shit with it. You can change the color of it in real time. You have a cycle of rainbow colors. It's a very good suite of stuff. It's also just very big. It's
real big,
a bit of a challenge.
And one of the tricky things for us is like we have our own tech stack that's a decade old of all kinds of stuff that we're doing.
Yep.
And bringing in a project of basically the size of Scribble on its own is like twice the size of our entire tech stack, right? So bringing in that many assets, that much code, that much stuff into the project, and then figuring out how to integrate that into our tech stack.
Yeah, because rendering is really it's really complicated. Because like think about also the rendering. There's stuff is happening on a loop, right? Where like what the text is supposed to be, somehow you calculate where it's supposed to be, and then during the game loop, there's a draw phase where all that information is discovered and has been computed, and it's converted into rendering calls to like actually tell the game engine to slap those
text
little images down, right?
Yeah.
And so that loop, like anyone's tech stack for how all those things interact is going to be different depending on the needs of your game and how you set up all your behind the scenes technology stuff, right? So like integrating somebody else's into yours is
we can't just like grab it, unfortunately, even though
we could, but it would probably just take a lot longer to stitch it all together
and we don't need all that stuff, right? It's because again it's trying to solve every problem, and we have
because what we're basically trying to do then with how many dudes is hit that sweet spot where it's like we can encode certain pieces of text so that key words and key phrases that mean specific things, we have color coding for them. So as you read a tooltip, things pop out nicely and you can kind of make better sense of it. On top of then being able to click into a tooltip and then have a glossary pop up that has more information about those terms, right? So the glossary problem, we got that solved. That's something we could do pretty easily. It's the text encoding that's the hard part.
Mhm.
So that's something that I'm working on right now, working through all of the issues with it. But there's another kind of fun part of it that, again, it's just not something you think about that much. When you're a player, you're playing a game, you see the text changing color. You're like, that's cool, right? Well, how did the text change color? So if you open up a web page, kind of we're talking about HTML, you just see text and the text is changing color. If you look at the source code of that page, the text is pretty hard to read because it's jam-packed with all kinds of markups, right? So there'll be a sentence and then suddenly there's like a left angle bracket and then it's like B or bold or, whatever. And there's like a bunch of new information wrapping around certain words or phrases that tells the web browser how to render it differently or how to attach a link to it
the general
or
idea
whatever.
is that you just parts of text that you want to do something to, you have to wrap with something. You basically have to indicate that that thing needs special treatment, right?
Yep.
And then explain somehow what the special treatment is, right? And so there's two sides of that problem. Sometimes you solve those the same way, right? So as in like in HTML, you can just be like, here's a bold tag. So now I've told you that the next stuff needs special treatment and boldness is that special treatment, right? Or if you're using like a command line terminal, the way that those work is they just send a code that tells you to change stuff, right? It's like, hey, start being red now. And now stuff is red until
be red until I tell you to stop being red.
Yeah.
Basically.
So there's different ways to do it, but they all work the same way, which is that something embedded in the text itself, right, has to tell you, hey, pay attention, something needs to change about how you're rendering stuff.
Yeah. And so aside from basically figuring out the technical side of like just, how would you break up the text and display it in different chunks so that each chunk has a certain color and, figure out where the line breaks are, which is a different problem we could talk about if we want to. Figure out where the line breaks are and then how to render it properly. How does it even know where you want the color to change, right? And so in our case, basically we had to come up with a new framework for like how do we write our tooltips where we encode information in it. In our case, it looks probably more like BB code than HTML.
Conceptually the same though. There's a start tag and an end tag.
Yeah, but where basically as we write a tooltip, then for certain keywords to flag those keywords and wrap them in text that explains to the text parser, here's this is a keyword, so it needs to be drawn in this color. Right?
Yeah, but that stuff also has to be easy for you to author so that you don't do it
right.
wrong.
Because
and
now,
it has to be easy for translators to not fuck up while they're doing translation because they have to keep that stuff in place. But because when you're doing translation, like things shift around, like right, things get kind of weird when you're doing translation, and so they have to make sure that they can maintain like, yeah, I've wrapped the right stuff that means the same thing as the stuff that was. So all that has to be easy for a person as well as for a machine.
Yeah, and so so I think we got a pretty good handle on it in terms of
because there's lots of ways you could do it, right? Because one thing you could have done, like what we could have done, is you could have said, I have my little bracket and it says tooltip, so that now, like when I'm parsing it, I know that this thing that's happening right now is for a tooltip, right? But now when you're dealing with it, that means you have to like encode a bunch of information about what a tooltip means, right? So that there's now an extra layer that has to happen. Versus if you just say the color is white, right?
The color of this next
then
word
now
is white.
you know exactly what's happening. The machine knows what's happening. The person knows what's happening. There's not an extra layer but you could do these things either way. So there's also this huge range of ways that you could solve it.
Right. Which again kind of comes back to like if you pull an off the shelf solution that somebody else has made,
it'll have solved it some way, and that's how you're doing it now, right?
Yeah.
Whatever
so then you'll have to learn how it's doing it, and then sort of like rewrite all your tooltips so that they can be interpreted properly,
and hope that whatever limits it has created work with the constraints that you have, right? Because for example, like because we used square brackets to indicate, right? But if we had made a choice where like parts of our text had square brackets in them, that didn't mean that. Now all of a sudden we have a problem. So but we know what we're doing because we're making all of the decisions. So we can make choices that all work together. But if we use somebody else's off the shelf thing, and it used parentheses to indicate something, or some other character set that we're already using for other stuff.
We're using curly braces for some other things, right? So like if it used that, then we'd be screwed. Yeah. So we basically had to go through and solve all these problems, so that I hope that when we launch the game, when people see the tooltip and they see some of the words are white, or whatever, that maybe by kind of like listening to this episode, you get a sense of like
appreciate.
That was like a lot of work, because also the final step of all this is, once that's all set up, now you have the privilege of going back through every single tooltip, every single one, and updating it so that it now has this color information in it. At this point, we're closing on 400 for tips. So
400 tooltips.
Yeah. So once the tech part is done, then there's just this kind of like busy work.
Big
angle
refactor.
to it.
Yeah, some of it's fairly regexable, so like you could kind of do it in some batches and then fine tune, but even then it's
tough.
When it's human language stuff, there's only so much that can just be done, right?
But it's also kind of back to what we were talking about at the very beginning. There's that consistency and clarity question as well, which is like, as we've been working on the game more, new things have appeared, like new concepts have been added to the game that actually do
stuff that was clear became unclear because of changes to the game.
Right. And so all those old tooltips needed to be rewritten anyways. But yeah, it's a huge undertaking, and I think it's one of those, to Sam's point, it's one of those funny things where if you're a game programmer, like when I started playing Slay the Spire 2, or even just original Slay the Spire, right? And I open up a card and I see that certain words
information pops out on the side
or whatever. There's certain key words that they've highlighted, and I'm like jealous.
I was watching my wife
look
play,
at these slick little boys. Oh my god!
Like the stuff that impresses me as a game programmer is that kind of shit. Right. Not like, wow, look at the realism of the scene.
But there's also something that's just really nice, because I was watching my wife play Pocopia. She's been she got back from her trip and was kind of sick, so she's been mostly just like playing the shit out of Pocopia. And cool game, but similarly, the thing that like I've been very focused on the UI work, right? Because that game is like, it's mostly UI. Like, there's so much UI stuff going on.
Most games are mostly UI.
Most games are mostly UI, actually, right? And like all the dialogue and stuff is because it's like, it has the same thing. It's like everything is color coded, right? And the simplicity of that mechanism of communication to tell you that like, this is important and means something specific. It's so remarkably effective. It's so good. And all it is a color change. And you also know the idea too of like the color change versus like boldness or whatever, right? You will notice when you're like playing games that it's the most common thing you see, if you see anything at all, is a color change.
Because again, boldness means a different font.
Yeah,
right?
Boldness means a different font. Italics means a different font. And then also underlines are not even a related concept. An underline is a post-processing thing you do to text, right?
But it still requires you to know where on the screen each of the characters are, and then sort of like,
so you could draw a line under it. Right?
Draw a line.
So that's going to be, so you'll see that. So you can actually, if you like survey game UI stuff.
Yeah, there's like a ranking of like how challenging this is, right?
The commonality of what you see different things done to text basically tells you like what those things are and how they relate to fonts and rendering and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And in a weird way, there's certain things like having text that's like wiggling around or something that is probably not really much harder than like getting underlines.
You already have to have solved almost all the same problems.
Yeah, it's flashier, but what that means behind the scenes is that the developer for literally every single letter that's wiggling around is controlling in code like where that letter is and moving it around. So I don't know. I thought it would become an interesting thing to kind of dig into, of like, all we want to do is just convey clear information to the player.
Yeah, but you'd think again that like on an engine level that this would be a very easy thing for you to start doing, right? But it's just not, like, it's just not provided for. And in the same way that so much like UI, font, and all this other stuff is just not addressed by engines themselves. So when you look at a game like Undertale or an indie game, Pocopia, whatever else, that has wiggly text in it, or just highlights, it's like, you know that those devs had to figure that out and that it was very challenging to do. I mean, I'm happy to report that it sounds like, because of course this becomes part of our tech stack going forward, right? That we can iterate on.
Yeah.
Is that, and I guess that you can correct me if this is wrong, but is it the case that once we have just the ability to color stuff, which we should have soon, that we can then add layers onto it if we want to in the future, so we can make stuff wiggling or whatever, sort of as we feel like, investing like a little bit of extra time in, because the biggest solve is this first one, right? As far as like,
yeah, it's basically coming up with like what do you do to the text so that your renderer knows to even change color.
Right.
So that's the idea of like putting a square bracket and C: for color, and then like a hex code or whatever.
Yeah, and then
There's
how
that
do you
angle.
parse that out? How do you store it? And then how do you do? Because Seth mentioned earlier, I think it is important. Seth mentioned earlier the line break problem.
The
right?
line
This
break.
This is another one of those things. It's like, again, you don't think about it if you use a word processor, or most of the time when you're doing web stuff, because you can
web
actually
handles
there's a
those.
lot of control you can have for how line breaks work on the web, right?
Yeah.
But by default, they just work. Like things break across the line, and the box that something is in just gets taller to fit that stuff, right? And again, you can like change how that stuff works, and you can take more control over it. But kind of like out of the gate, line breaks are just a thing that happens. So you're used to that being like how stuff works, right? But at least, again, Godot is the one I don't really know enough about. But as far as I know from all the other game engines, they don't do line breaks for you. They don't compute that.
Well, so GameMaker will do line breaks.
Okay.
But
all right, but it's limited because they don't handle. They don't do it well, right?
There's an internationalization problem.
Yeah.
Because what it's like in English, we might say like, okay, whenever there's a space, we can do a line break there, right? But also, if there's a hyphen, you can do a line break sometimes.
Yeah, after the hyphen. Yeah.
But then in other languages, some of them don't have spaces.
Yeah. So
what do you do?
Or even if
right?
they do, that's like for Japanese and Chinese, you can break after every character, right? And it works. It's fine.
But you have to
and we were told that's the preferred way to do it, at least in the context of video games, right?
Right.
Korean does have spaces, so you break on spaces. But then also different languages have different kinds of spaces, right?
As in like behind the scenes, like it may look like a space or something, but then behind the scenes, it actually is a different like so. If a space
like it is a
character,
space, but it's a space.
It looks like a space, but it's something else.
Because all spaces look the same, right?
Yeah. So there are concepts called non-breaking spaces, which looks like a space, but it actually tells the computer you can't line break on this space.
The space can go there, but you can't break the line.
Yeah, because for example, like in when you're rendering numbers, it's like we put like for 1,000, we put like 1,000,000. In some languages, it's 1 space 000, but it's a non-breaking space, right? So there's all these different things where you have to kind of take into account, which means that to render these tooltips, and we had to solve this in Crashens too, actually. So this is kind of carryover tech from before. Is we had to write our own line
breaker. Oh my god, the things you will do as a game dev.
Something that goes through the text and figures out where can we break the line. Now here's the problem. When it comes to line breaking normal ass text, no big deal. You got a string of characters. It's just one long string of characters, right? And you just like, let me just walk through this string and figure out where the line breaks can be. It's too long. Okay, we'll break it there, right? So an easy way to do that is if you basically think about like each line of text that you break, you then like add it to a new slot in a list. So now instead of ending up with like, one big string of characters, you have a list of strings of characters, and each entry in the list is one line, right? If you are suddenly now adding color information in there, or whatever, right? If you imagine trying to read HTML, right? The actual string that you have is not what the player will see, because you're going to strip out a bunch of stuff, right?
So what the person sees is it with all stripped out, but then with like changes in color or whatever.
Right.
But what you have that you're storing is now a sequence of text and commands that tell you to do something, like change the font, change the color.
A lot of those characters should not be considered for line breaks because
They're
the
not
player-
visible.
they're not visible, right? So what you got to do then is you have to figure out, you have to strip all that stuff out, get an actual string that is what the player would see, right? And then you need to still figure out where the line breaks are going to go, but then somehow map that information back onto the blob of data that you're going to end up with that is like all the color
recombined,
information
So that
and
when you then
everything
go
else.
to render it in those lines, you can then swap fonts, swap colors,
Right.
swap whatever, right?
Right. Because if you're, and it's an expensive process to do because it takes so much like walking through the all the different characters and like figuring out all this positional information and stuff, that you have to figure out a way to do it and then store that somewhere so that when you try to draw that text, you can do it efficiently, right? So like it's not like every single frame it has to like break the string apart again and
Hold it.
check.
Yeah.
Because it would really like bog things down. So
Yeah, but if you want to be able to dynamically switch languages, say for like taking automated screenshots, for doing QA or whatever, right? Then you might actually need to be able to do that. So it gets
it's very tricky.
you have to
And
make
then
those decisions constantly about
and
like
then-
what do I need to do?
the most fun part about line breaks, even if you ignore the color coding problem.
I'm having a great time already.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So the most fun part about line breaks is scale. Okay. So
Oh, God, yes.
let's imagine
It's the worst.
Imagine you're in a word processor and you type 20,000 words. Okay. No problem. Just keep adding pages to the bottom. Just keep adding space to the bottom, and
Never ends.
It never ends, and the text, no matter how many words you type, the text just gets taller. It just keeps getting taller.
Browser's the same deal. Though, again, you have things you can do, like say, no, you can only be this tall, but just add a scroll bar.
Just
And
add a
that'll just
scroll
happen.
bar. No
Yeah,
problem.
no big deal.
Right? What do you do if you have text that has line breaks but needs to fit in a box both horizontally and vertically?
Ooh.
Yeah, so the box
now,
is predefined rather than adjusting itself based on that
Right.
text.
So you might think like, okay, well, I will do the line breaks,
Same thing I did before.
right? And if it
You could-
turns out it's too tall, then I'll shrink it so that it fits vertically.
Well, I mean, the first thing you could think is like, oh, just add a scroll bar, right? Except, again, that's not technology that exists already.
That's just a different problem you have to
So
solve.
if you
from
do
a UX
that,
standpoint,
now you
it's
have to
fucking weird.
solve how
Yeah.
scroll bars and scrolling works with controllers, with touch, with whatever.
Right.
So we're
Right.
going to assume you're not doing that.
So we'll assume you're not doing that. So you might think like, all right, well, I can shrink it. If the text doesn't fit, I can shrink it. How the fuck are you going to do that? Because
you're not shrinking it. You're not just shrinking it vertically to make it weird and
Yeah,
squish,
you're
right? You're
shrinking
going
it
to
as a
scale it.
square.
You're actually
Yeah.
scaling it, which means that now the size of the whole thing has changed. Which means the
right,
line breaks
well,
have changed.
which means your line breaks are wrong, right? Because you go through the line breaks are based on how big the text is and what the space is, right? So you go through, you do your line breaks, and you're like, shit, it's too tall. It's expanding. It's going beyond the bottom of the box. If I rescale it just based on the vertical thing, so it now vertically fits, now all of a sudden the line break's in the wrong place, and it's now like only occupying half the space of the box, right?
Yeah. So basically, because as you downscale something kind of proportionally,
It's getting
You
shorter
actually-
horizontally
Yeah.
too.
You're
yeah.
scaling.
So you actually end up getting more space than it seems like you would because of the reflow that should happen.
Right. So that means like the only way, and again, this is like there's not an elegant solution to this problem. There just isn't. The solution to this problem is brute force, which is you just go, okay, I'm trying to draw this text at a scale of 1 in this box. We did our line breaks. Shit. It's too tall.
Too big.
All right. Let's drop it down to 0.95 scale. Run it again. Do the line breaks. Does it fit? No? All right. 0.9. We'll just, and you just rescale it and rescale it and rescale it, redo the line breaks. And you have to do that recursively until eventually
figure out
It
what the hell the
fits.
size is.
Yeah,
Right.
but it also could never fit because there are some.
it might never, it might get
Yeah,
down
'cause
to scale of 0. And it's like, that's what it needs. It needs to be 0. There's
Yeah.
no way.
Yeah, or sorry, I guess it could get so small that it doesn't matter that it fits.
Right. Because it's not readable anymore. Yeah. And so, and then if you kind of compound that recursive line breaking problem back into making that work with your having broken up the text already with color information and other stuff, and you got so the whole thing is just kind of like it's a lot like we've talked about credits and about other kinds of like things that seem like as a player this is a mundane solved problem. Who gives a shit, right? But just for context, like earlier this week, I coded up 3 dudes in one day to add to the game. That is like adding new dudes to how many dudes is a really interesting thing for players, and it's like a unique problem to how many dudes, right? And so when people see a new dude, like, wow, incredible! That like this must have been taking so much design, and it's like you got to balance it and whatever. And like, no, as a game designer, that shit is old hat. Like we can make that stuff fun and interesting and crank that up, no problem. The hard stuff is the stuff that's boring as fuck. it's the
tooltips, man. Ugh.
Yeah. So like, I was gonna put out a call. Listen, when we get how many dudes out, if you like the game and you're going to leave us a thumbs up on Steam, I just want one of those reviews to be like, man, these tooltips are just great. Like, sure, the game is good, but you can tell that so much passion went into making the text in these tooltips have different colors.
I genuinely, though, I'm so excited that we finally have a context in which solving this problem is worthwhile. Yeah,
because then they're solved, right?
Because then you have it. Yeah, that's the nice. Like we have it in our text.
Well, importantly though, like because of as we covered, like there's so many dimensions to this problem. It's a can of worms, which is why why that Scribble extension is
enormous,
giant, right? So the way that that I'm solving this problem right now, it will solve it in this context, but there are certain things that I'm not going to solve because it doesn't matter for this, right? So it will be the case that like whenever we move to some next thing, like, oh, now it needs to do this, right? Then yeah, I'll probably have to redo or refactor several aspects of it, right? But at least the core framework will be there, and we'll be able to use it. So
yeah, it didn't get meaningfully easier to add underlines, right?
Yeah,
it got meaningfully easier to tell where you would want an underline. Like now, now how that works, but making it actually exist is still a different kind of
it's pretty challenging. Yeah, so that's just it's just a little peek behind the curtain of just some of the shit that you wouldn't think about, but it's actually really, really hard.
Yeah, and this is just true for all
game dev,
all design, period. But certainly all software. This is true for games. It's true for websites, and depending on what the platform is, the engine that you're using, whether it's like a browser or a game engine or Swift or whatever, just whatever that is, that's going to be built to do certain things really well. It's going to be built to have like sort of decided kinds of solutions for certain kinds of problems for you. And any of those decisions that are being made, it makes something else harder.
Yeah.
Right. And so no matter what you're building, you're going to have these fights where there's going to be stuff where like you'll get really good at the thing that seems like the point. But then a huge fraction of your time goes into making sure that the thing is like actually good and deliverable in the first place. And it's like all the other stuff around the thing that feels like the point ends up consuming like,
and you got to reframe in your mind. Like the point is to deliver a great experience to your player,
Yes. Yeah, it's to deliver the whole game.
It is the whole thing.
It's the whole game. And even though like, I was joking with my wife about the stuff where I'm like, the UI stuff is often the most interesting to work on just because it's like, it's just like a novel problem after novel problem as a developer, right? But it's some of the least satisfying stuff to deliver just because like, if I add a new dude, it's like, that's a new thing I can do in the game. I can play with this new dude, right? If now some of the words are white,
it's also like what people have seen before, right? As in, like, because part of what makes it so disappointing is even though it's really nice, you're like, this feels like it should have already been solved, though, right? So it doesn't feel like a big deal because, like, again, you can go on the web and you can see a million fonts and colors and whatever being displayed at any given moment, and you can see that in some games, right? But the idea, though, like the concept of text changing
It's so familiar to people, or even just
Yeah.
like I have to do a pass on all the UI elements to make sure that they're more readable on small screens, right? Because some of the text is just too small. And again, it's like that's just going to take quite a while. It's going to take at least a couple of days, like go through all the UIs and kind of come up with ways to make sure that they're standardized and readable and all that stuff. And after a couple of days of work, there's nothing new. There's nothing new in the game. It's just some of the stuff that was harder to read is easier to read.
I would say there's usually a reason people will play your game, right? If you're lucky.
Yeah, and there's a million reasons they'll quit.
Yes, yeah. It's a lot of this is actually just the other part, and it's like, yeah, I think that's
you've got them. Don't lose them. You got to put in the legwork on the stuff that and this is honestly, this is like when we were talking about mutagenics, and some of the quality of life stuff or some of the UI things that really just kind of threw a wrench into it for some of us. Like for me, it was just is mostly the poop. That was the biggest problem, which isn't a UI problem.
It's just a choice.
It's just a decision.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's some of these things where if you don't meet those expectations of the player, then you're really just like cruising on trust, right? Where it's kind of like you just hope that the player is willing to kind of get past those things and trust that.
But
you're
even
still
when you
gonna get
do
a
for
good
stuff, because
experience,
this kind of a thing, like color coding of a poor piece of text and being extremely consistent about it, right? That's the kind of thing that the absence of it doesn't go explicitly noted. As in a person wouldn't realize like, oh, this is a bad experience. What they would experience is just constant,
just a low level confusion.
Because everything's harder than it could have been, but they don't experience it as it could have been, right? They experience it as it is, and they don't. So their experience is just that reading tooltips is a little confusing all the time, trying to keep track of like, oh, does this mean that, and whatever, right? And so this is also the thing about these unseen changes where, having said it would be cool to get a comment about how nice it is, right? We won't. We will not get a comment about that. Nobody will notice it.
To me, it's the equivalent of when you go into
it will have improved the game substantially. And this is the thing you have to be really careful about when you're deciding whether or not to do something, right? Because if you do something and then nobody notices, right? That doesn't mean it wasn't worth doing, right? That's just not what that means.
You should see it in terms of how players respond.
Yeah, a lot of what you're trying to do for quality of life stuff is basically get out of the way so that people don't notice. And it's the fact that people didn't notice it, right? Yeah. It's the absence of any meaningful feedback.
It's the absence of a problem. It's the game dev version of you're running a shop and people keep pulling on the door instead of pushing, right? And it's because it has a fucking handle on it, right?
No one's going to tell you they're glad they didn't get the door wrong.
Yeah, and it's not going to come up. It's not going to come up in reviews. Nobody's going to be like, I wouldn't recommend going here. The door is weird.
It's also not the major point, right? It's not the point people wouldn't think about going.
It's just a stumbling block that just kind of makes the whole experience of going in there just a little bit worse. It
adds a little bit of embarrassment to the end of your otherwise good.
Yeah, it's like just put a plate on the door so people push it, right?
It's important to note like where in the dev cycle too you should address some of these things, right? Because I think the reality is like you have to first nail the first part, which is again making a thing that people will come to you for, right?
Yeah, even if it doesn't have these.
Even if it is, and I think that's been one of our things we've thought about a lot with How Many Dudes is actually the goal with it was that it shouldn't matter if there's jank, because it so clearly does not matter for a lot of hit games that there's a lot of jank. So it cannot matter for whatever the initial thing is that we make that it's got some rough edges to it in terms of whether people are willing to stick around and play it. If it matters that much, then the thing isn't that good.
Right.
It's not worth polishing, at that point.
We're kind of banking on that being like, by taking the time to really smooth out those experiences, like we're getting people in the door and now we want them to stay, right? And so that it's just these little marginal things at that point to just make the game a little bit better, just all the time. And then by the time we deliver it, people are like, holy shit. Like we were kind of joking earlier about how
their only experience is good. Just period. Right.
And we were joking earlier about how we kept getting the comment from people about the demo of How Many Dudes, where they're like, why is this listed as a pre-alpha? Like it feels like this is just a game. This is just a whole game, right? And our goal is that when people get the full game, they'll be like, oh, I get it. Yeah, I get it. I see all the things that I hadn't even thought of, but now they're all here now, and it's like so much better. than I could have imagined it could be, right? And it's just all these little things, right? So, anyways, I hope our listeners enjoyed this deep dive on tooltips. We could call this episode, let's talk about tooltips for 55 minutes.
Honestly, it's a pretty good title.
Because that's what it is. But it's all very interesting. We could have gone longer, but we should probably stop. So
yeah, and it's that constant reminder that there's no such thing as a simple problem in game dev. The fact that we could talk about tooltips for 55 minutes and frankly not get that deep into it, right?
We skip a lot,
Yeah, that means that, because if you think about that fact, then what does that mean for anybody actually doing this work? It means they're spending days, weeks, months, right, of their lives, like dealing with these problems, developing philosophies around it, developing toolkits to be able to deal with it, and deciding, yes, no, we can't do this, and like dealing with the consequences of those decisions, right? Like, and that's just for something like
there's real craftsmanship
that nobody notices.
There.
Yeah,
appreciate it. It's the little things like that. So, anyways, we'll have to clock out here. So, we'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa Acosta for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate to support the podcast, and links to the archives. And if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam, pick up a copy of How Many Dudes, the demo. It's free. It's great. And as we just discussed, if you play it now, you'll be able to get a nice anchor point and see all the shit that we're doing, and all the things that we're improving when it fully comes out, so you can appreciate it that much more. So thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.